think we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Build Your First CI/CD Pipeline. This is a session for newcomers to building a CI/CD pipeline. It's basically a look inside my learning process of how I went about figuring this out. My name is Amber Matz. I'm a developer advocate at Tugboat. And before that, I was 12 years at Drupalize Me, writing tutorials, doing Drupal education type of things. And whereas I've been a user of CI/CD pipelines and the status checks that happen, it was a mystery to me how you would interact with that. Like, how would you get in there? Like, if I had a request, like we did everything in Markdown, and so we added Veil and Markdown linters, and I would just request that of my colleague Joe and say, hey, can we add this, and can you tune this? And I had a vague idea of how this happened, but I never really did this myself. And when I moved to Tugboat, which is more DevOps adjacent, and is in that pipeline, I wanted to get a learning environment set up so that I could figure out how this worked and how do you learn this without messing up. I don't want to mess up the work environment, right? I want a personal project that I can use and play around with, and it doesn't matter if what happens or what disasters I instigate. It's just my playground. It's my personal site. So today we're going to learn how I created a sandbox to learn some concepts with CI/CD, a process of adding a local CLI tool that you love to a pipeline so that it can be an automated check, and 6 essential concepts that I learned along the way. So first off, just so we're all on the same page, what is CI/CD? That could go on and on. In a nutshell, CI stands for continuous integration, and CD stands for continuous development. And in software delivery land, it's the ability to say that the code that's living on the main trunk can be deployed to production at any time, because these automatic status checks have run and they've passed, and we have confidence that when we deploy that to the live server, it's not going to break the site. And also it's this spectrum of even automating that deployment so that when status checks pass and then it automatically deploys. I really see it as a spectrum, and so it can be anywhere along the line, and it's all about adding quality checks into your development process so that you can catch errors way earlier than, hey guys, we're deploying tomorrow, why is there white screen? Right? So adding those quality checks earlier on into your development process, into the automated checks that happen when you're interacting on your Git repo, when things are on a staging environment, and having confidence that you're not going to break the site. So a simple CI/CD pipeline with automated checks, I've see if I can even read my own writing. So I've checked out a branch, and I'm testing this on my local. I've got new fancy wallpaper for my site, and I'm going to push that up and create a pull request. So as soon as I create the pull request, the checks start kicking off. So I've got several things wired up here. Here's a linter that is going to run prettier, which is a formatting check, and a markdown check. And so all of that just like automatically kicks off because of how I've wired things up. And so those green check marks there, that area with all the checks, that's what we're talking about. How do we get in there and insert a check into that process, into those status checks, so that we can check the things that matter to us. So where I started was, I've got a repo and I've got a local. I can commit changes and push them up to that repo. Really nothing else is happening at that point, right? I'm just pushing up to the repo, ta-da. And so what I want to add is, okay, creating a workflow where I'm creating a pull request, that's triggering some automatic quality checks, merge it in, that triggers an automatic deployment, and the site is live. So how do I create a sandbox so that I can practice doing that workflow, simulating that workflow that you would see in a team environment. And so what I did was I created and set up a new repo that builds and deploys a Hugo site, and Hugo is a static site generator, to GitHub Pages using what GitHub calls GitHub Actions. And I used this template by GitHub user Kai Jimmy, and it's this template Hugo-theme-stack-starter. And it's a template repository. So when you go to that repo page, you click the green button that says use this repository, you create a new repo. You name it your GitHub username.github.io. That's the name of the repo. And then you go into the settings for the repo under pages, and under this build and deployment, you configure that to say GitHub Actions instead of like from a branch. And that is going to do some magic. So on my local, now that template repository, it has instructions for deploying this using code spaces, but I wanted to set up a local so that I could get a sense of the dependencies that you need to run these tools and to run Hugo. And so I cloned the repo, and I'm on a Mac, so I'm using Homebrew to install the dependencies I need to run Hugo. And I want you, this idea of like thinking about the dependencies that you need to run these commands is really important, because you're going to need that in your config. So I'm being mindful about that. So I'm installing Hugo, and I'm installing Go, which that's what runs Hugo. And then I can run Hugo server, and I've got a local host. So let me show you what that looks like. I can type. Okay, so what I got using that that repo, let me just close this, is, look at there, in .github/workflows is this deploy.yml. I didn't know that this was going to be there when I chose this theme. I just spent a lot of time picking a theme, and I'm like, I got to pick a theme for my personal site so I can create this talk about create your first CI/CD pipeline. And lo and behold, the theme that I chose has a pipeline already, and I'm so excited about this. So you can all go home now, like just clone this, and you can have a deployment pipeline. It's awesome. So this is what I started with, is a build and deploy, but I'm scrolling through this, and my eyes are starting to glaze over a little bit. And there's a lot of info in here, and I'm thinking, okay, I'm so glad that someone else wrote this, because what is going on here? I need a simpler place to start. So this was my starting point, but the moral of the story is you use this template repo, you too can have a build and deploy pipeline that's going to work if you configure your repo to use GitHub Actions. So pretty sweet. If when you download that repo, it's got some demo content. If you push that up to your repo, it will deploy it, and then I've got a live site at agentolivia.github.io, just like that. So pretty cool. I was pretty stoked about that. So where I started after I started was, okay, I can commit changes to the main branch, and I've triggered an automatic deployment. So pretty sweet. So now I've got these bookends of my pipeline, and now we're going to get into the mix in the middle, and we're going to I'm going to start using a pull request workflow, and I'm going to trigger some automatic quality checks that I'm going to add to the mix. So all of this is happening because in that deploy.yml, I've got this on key, and that's a trigger. And you can kind of tell it's pretty intuitive. On, push, branches, main. So on a push to main, and I did have to update the branch from master to main, it works. So yay. So here's the process that I want to propose. So set up and test a local tool, like a command line tool that you like something that you can install with npm, and install it locally, and run the command, see all of the output that is like, this is garbage, this is not helpful at all, like this is way too many messages, tune the config, tune the ignore files, so they'll all have different naming conventions depending on what the tool is. Ask Google, ask Claude, ask the documentation like what that config needs to look like so that you're applying the rules that align with what your standards are and what maybe aligns with your team standards or whatever, until you get a set of results when you run that check that's like, oh yeah, I do need to change that. Like, this is now helpful to me. It's not an overwhelming amount of results that are like kind of garbage. They're relevant, they're useful, and they're what you need. So then, once you've got it tuned, add the command to the scripts key in your package.json, and so then you're running it. Now fix the files that have the error until you've got 0 results, commit all of that, push it up. And that's step 1 process. So now I decided to start with Prettier. So Prettier is a formatting tool. It makes sure that all of your tab indents and everything are consistent. So you've got a standard of like 2 spaces for tabs. It'll make sure everything is switched over to that every time you save, or you can configure it to every time you paste in. It's really useful when you're copying and pasting code from various places and you don't want to sit there and use the cursor to get all that fixed. So it's something so I'm using VS Code. It's something I can configure in VS Code. It's like, okay, this is a dev tool that I'm using. Why not put it into my automatic checks? So npm install --save--dev, and that's going to install into the dev dependencies key in the package.json, and Prettier is the name of the package. I created a .prettierrc and a .prettieриgnore file in the root of my repo, and then I added the format:check command. So that's the command that I'm going to run, and that's going to correspond to Prettier --check, and that all goes in the scripts key on package.json. So now I'm going to run that, npm run format:check. I'm going to modify the config and the ignore. It's like, oh, no, I don't want, please do not check the node modules directory, right? Don't, like, all of those things need to be ignored. And this whole time, I got to remember, what did I need before I could even npm install? Node, right? So Node.js lets you run JavaScript outside of a web browser environment, so I needed Node. So that's something I need to keep in mind. So now I'm ready to add the workflow. Today I'm talking about GitHub Actions specifically. These concepts apply to the other repo hosts like GitLab, but the location, the name of the file, it will be a little bit different, but the broader concepts still apply. So where GitHub expects to find these workflows is in the root of your repo. .github is the name of the directory, and then the subdirectory is workflows. And then you need to have files in there that are .yml extensions. And in VS Code, once you create this directory and create your first file, it'll say, hey, you want to install this GitHub Actions extension. And that's a great thing to install because when you hover over each key, you get some documentation and links off to the docs. It helps you with some autocomplete, so super useful extension to use. You can find an action that fits whatever tool, like check the GitHub Actions marketplace, or you'll check the documentation for that tool. So you've got the file created. Like how do you know what to put in there? Like where do you get the copy pasta for this, right? So does the tool have an official GitHub Actions documentation, like Prettier does? And you can use that. Or is there check out the GitHub Actions Marketplace. There's a whole bunch of templates and examples in there for a lot of tools. Check that. If for some reason you're not finding that, then you can look at similar projects. You can ask AI. Honestly, I skipped to the end and I just asked Claude. And the reason why it worked is because there's such great documentation for it. So that's how you know what to put there. Okay, so let me just show you an example of that. I guess I could have made my tags a little bit shorter. Whatever. Okay, so the first one I added was called lint, and just bear with me. I know that a formatter isn't a linter, but like it's cool. So I wanted to put, you can put multiple commands to different tools in the same file. So I was thinking I'll throw prettier in there and like a markdown linter in there. So I named the file lint.yml. So at the top I've got a trigger on push. So any pushes to main, like if I'm just YOLO pushing stuff to my personal sandbox, like it's gonna run on that. Same with pull request. And then this workflow dispatch, which is just kind of hanging out there, this little island key, that is going to create a manual trigger button in the UI, or I think in the API as well. And so then we have this jobs. Here's a lint job. It's gonna run on Ubuntu, so it needs an operating system to run on. And then here are the steps. And each of the steps have a human-friendly name. And that's gonna be a label for like this expand and collapse element. And you'll see these shortcuts here, like action/checkout at v4. So that's a reference to a GitHub action, like pre-built goodie that you can use. So that makes it really easy. Just quick foreshadowing, or I'm not going over my Veil one, but I did this with Veil too. And Veil can be a little bit complicated to set up because it's not just an NPM library, but there was already, like, I didn't have to worry at all because there was already something that will run Veil in the marketplace. So it was great. It was easy. And then here, I'm going to run install dependencies, so npm CI, and that's a particular command that's really friendly on in workflows like this and in the command line, better than npm install, because it's not going to like install little updates, and mess with your package.lock. And then running the prettier check. So it's all the things that you need to do to run this command. And it's kind of funny when you start thinking in terms of this way of thinking, like you install a bunch of programs on your computer and you kind of forget what's running that enables you to type all these commands that work. And so as you're building out these pipelines and working with services that interact with pipelines, like talk about, you want to think about those dependencies, like what do I need to run this? And so that's just a good mindset to get into. Okay. And yeah, so once I set that up and did a push up to my repo, here's a screenshot of the log that runs that shows the job running, and there it is. It ran npm run format : check, which is exactly what I told it to do. So winning. And then here's when you have a workflow that has two different jobs, it shows how they're connected together. So that deploy.yaml file has two jobs, a build and deploy, and you can see they're connected. Like first the build ran, they're not running in parallel, the build needs to run first, and then the deploy needs the build job to run first. So you can see how they're connected and how long it took. That's all great. So totally winning right now. So very excited about that. And I've got everything built out in a very simple way. And so then I went on to, I added Veil, I added Markdown, a Markdown linter, and And then I started to realize, like, well, what's going on with, how these are all related? And, I don't want the build and deploy to run all the time. Like, I only want it to run if the linter passes, So how do these things, how can I create some dependencies here? And I learned so much during this process of just setting that up. And I just want to check in about some of the high-level concepts that are really important in this process. So the first concept is the whole idea of the config file. The whole idea that you have a version-controlled file that lives in your repo that defines an automation. It's not some super secret, like, only the sysadmin has access to log into some UI and configure a bunch of stuff, and if he gets the flu or something, then like we don't know what is going on with our automation because it's like this black box situation. It's in a file, it's in the repo, it's in version control. That's pretty cool. And that file describes the environment, triggers, jobs, steps, and how they connect into a pipeline. And that's just an overview of that. And it's located and named predictably depending on what platform you're in. So GitHub, you're always going to put it in that .github/workflows. Other platforms, you're going to name it a certain name so that the platform knows, like, it's looking for that file. If it's there, oh, cool, let's do some stuff. What I just said. The next concept is the environment. Might not be something that you thought about a lot. It's something that's really easy to take for granted, but it's a real sticking point. And this can be the hardest part in configuring this, is figuring out what it is that is needed here. Some situations are simpler than others. So the environment for this deploy, it's specifying some versions of Dart SAS, Go, Hugo, Node, and a time zone, because it's also got an update theme job that runs on cron. So it runs on a schedule, so it needs to know what time it is. And so the build environment, so you can see here on the right, this is what's in the config, and then here is the jobs, the log, and you can see how all of these versions are corresponding to what we said. So it's an obedient thing. So it's just gonna do what you tell it to do. It's very, and that's what makes it great, is it's in this file, it's repeatable, and that's what makes it automatable. Is that even a word, automatable? I don't know, I just made it up. You can automate it because it's in this file and it's gonna run the same way every time. Unless, these big platforms go down, and of course, that's the other thing. Okay, the next concept is jobs. So in a workflow file, which is what GitHub calls this, you've got the concept of jobs. And in this example, we have 2 jobs, a build and a deploy. So you can have like just one job in a file, or you can have multiple ones. You can have you can do whatever you want. I think the main thing is to make it comprehensible, right, to your future self and to your team members. Organize it in a way that makes sense so that you can get in there and sometime later, and if you need to troubleshoot or change something, you can make sense of how things are named and how the jobs are in there. So here's, once again, this example of, in the deploy.yaml file, there's 2 jobs, build and deploy, and they each have an independent status check. The next concept is steps. So like, what are all the commands that need to be run in what order, and what is everything we need for each of those steps? So that is what the concept of steps is. And so in this example, we're checking out the code, we're setting up Node.js, we're installing dependencies, we're running Prettier, we're running this markdown check. So that's the steps of a job. So, and those correspond to, like, the human readable, the human friendly name is corresponding there, so that you can see at a glance what steps were run, and then if you need to dig into what actually happened, if you're troubleshooting or if you're just curious, and you're learning about this, like what is actually happening. It's not magic, it's computers and stuff. So you can just go and look at that and see what's actually going on. The next concept that's important is triggers. So it's an automation, but it's not going to just like run all the time. It's going to run when it's been triggered. So in this situation, I've got highlighted triggered on via push now. So that's what happened. That's why this ran. And in this on key, we've got different values that can be run, different triggers. So it can be a push, it can be a I'll show you in a minute. It can be a workflow call, so you can call it from another file, or you can do a manual dispatch if you want to do that. So triggers. So that's all great. That's just what I learned in this, in just the process of setting up these jobs and adding these quality checks. But what now? Like, I started to wonder, like, well, these jobs are all running concurrently. How can I tie them together? How do these jobs connect into a flow? Which jobs should block the build and deploy? What do I want to pass before I want to deploy to the site? So this is where we go on a little journey of a pull request to see how I went about refactoring my lint into a pipeline. So let's take a look at that. I'm going to even have a seat. So we can click around in this pull request here. So what I started with was a lint.yaml file and that deploy YAML file, and I want to refactor this into a pipeline. So the first thing that I did was I created a new file. Is this big enough? I created a new file called pipeline.yml, and on a very basic level, it just set up the same triggers as I had before, the on push, branches, push to main, or pull request to main as the triggers, and then I set up two jobs, a lint and a deploy, same names, and then this says uses the file that I already created. So I'm referencing the lint.yaml, and then for the deploy, I'm saying it needs lint to pass before it'll run, and then use this deploy. So that was my first pass as a refactor. Spoiler alert, this isn't complete, but this was my first pass at refactoring. And then in the deploy.yaml, I removed the trigger for push, and I changed that to this workflow call, and that's what enables this to work, this uses. So this is a workflow call. And then I introduced an intentional error into my content. There's this markdown rule called no bare URLs. So the way I've got it configured, it's going to complain when it sees this URL with no, not inside any tag or anything like that. So I know that this should fail the linter when the markdown job runs. Okay, that was my first. And what happened is, so you can see in the commit, there's this red X here, and that could also be a check mark. So I can click on that, and I can see which jobs passed, which checks passed, and which ones failed. And I can go into the details here, and I can see that when the markdown check ran, it returned the error that I expected it. This bare URL used. And so the failure is what I wanted, and so that is a good thing there. Okay, but we're still not done. And I also needed to add the on workflow call to the lint file. I forgot to do that. And then I noticed that the deploy job wasn't running, and so I needed to copy over the permissions from that were in deploy into my pipeline. So I added the permissions that it needed to run. So I needed to do that too. So then things get a little hairy, and let's see, where was I? Here we go. Yeah. So then I fixed the problem. So now it should pass, but it doesn't. And the pipeline is now failing. And what I noticed is that what I didn't tell you is that earlier I was like, hey Claude, I want to add a security check to my deploy pipeline, so what's something simple I could add? And it's like, oh, add the npm audit command to the deploy. And so it's just snuck in there as a step. And it's just kind of hiding there. And that means now I've got the deploy job only running if the lint passes. And the deploy job is only going to run when there's a merge to main. So what does that mean? The security check isn't going to run until the deployment job is happening instead of on the pull request, which would be a really great time to know that there's a security vulnerability, right? So, but I'll tell you that I didn't see this right away. And so in my I went ahead and merged that so I could see the deployment job actually run and see what happened. And what I learned was that I needed to refactor. I needed to pull out that npm audit command so that it was, I wanted to put it in a separate job. So it was really super obvious, like, hey, I've got a security.yaml and it's going to run independently, so I know that it's there. So what I did was I ran the security audit on my local, and I found that it was the vulnerability was in the markdown library that I was using, and so I needed to update it to the latest version. So that was how to fix that. And then what I did is I added, is this big enough here? I added a job to my pipeline, which is security, and I added a security check on the workflow call that is going to run on Ubuntu, set up Node, install dependencies, and all that to run npm audit, and with the audit level that I decided on. And so now I've got a security in the mix here, a security check in the mix that is super obvious to me and I'm not going to forget about. And I updated the deploy job. Before it just needed it needs lint, and now it needs lint and security jobs to pass. So that's making a lot more sense. I was able to fix the security vulnerability, and now all of that is happening in the pull request triggers, in the pull request checks, not when it's when that pull request is merged, which just didn't make any sense. Okay, so that's how I refactored that. And let's see, I just want to check to make sure that there isn't anything else that I wanted to show you about that. Let's see, step. Yeah, so here's how it all worked out. So here's the pipeline file. I'm going to make this a little bigger here, maybe. No, not that way. There we go. So here's the pipeline file. It's running on triggers to the main branch, or like YOLO. This is like YOLO pushes, right? And then pull requests. And here's the jobs. So the lint is using my lint file over here. And the security is using my security workflow over here, which is going to run npm audit. And then the deploy is going to need the lint and the security. It's got permissions here. And then here's the other thing I had to do is, so this whole workflow has a trigger of pushing to main and pull requests. But I only want this to run if it's a push to main. So I don't want it to run on pull requests. triggers only on a merge to main, which is a push to main. So I had to add that. And so if that condition, well, sorry, all this help. If that condition is satisfied, then it's going to use this deploy, which is my build and deploy. This is my build and deploy to GitHub Pages job. Okay. So there's just so many types of quality that you can check. And it's really about what's in your code base, what do you care about, what are the repeating errors that keep happening, what keeps tripping you up, what's creating bottlenecks because you're having to stop and like deal with it all the time. Those are the types of things to think about, like, and okay, what's a tool that can be used, a command line tool that can be used to help with this error, help catch these errors. Okay, let me just start by using that on my local. Do I like this? Do I have the configuration tuned? Hey, let's add it now to our pipeline so that this check can run consistently. It's so easy to forget to run these tools on your local, and it's great when you've got an error, like a failure on the pull request. Oh yeah, forgot to run prettier on my local, gotta redo that and push it back up again. So it's just so helpful to have that redundancy of security checks instead of just relying on, you being sharp and like remembering everything that you need to do before you push something. Like, that's just not realistic. At least not for me, it isn't. So having these automated checks of whatever kind, whatever is important to you, whatever you need, it can probably be inserted into your pipeline. So what is the one tool that you love to use in your code editor that you could add to a CI/CD pipeline that would run automatically on every pull request? So that's the question to ponder. That's the thing if you've never done this process before, using the sandbox that I did and doing a Hugo site is a great way to get started, like playing around in a sandbox, and it was really fun to do, and also I just learned so much about it. So here's like a final demo of how this all worked together, and I'll say that like I added that pipeline, I did that refactor. I also wired up Tugboat, so that's running some automatic checks too, so that's kind of what is going to be demonstrated here. So I'm pushing a branch, I've got a new wallpaper design. I'm going to now, the next step in my workflow is to create a pull request. So I'm doing that. I'm changing the background to the stars. I'm creating the pull request, and now we're triggered, right? So our workflow is triggered. We've got a bunch of triggers happening. We've got my pipeline jobs, Tugboat is in the mix here. It's off to the races. So it's setting up Node. It's installing the dependencies. It's running prettier. It's running the markdown check. It's all happening very quickly. It was great. I can go back to the pull request and see what else is pending on here. I can see what has passed already, what is still working. Tugboat's given me a preview site. I can make sure that is behaving the same way that it was behaving on my local. I can get a link over to my dashboard. I can see the preview from there. I can see what services are running. I've got Lighthouse reports running, and I've got visual diffs. So I'm expecting a visual diff here because I've changed the background. So it's showing me the difference there visually. And those visual diffs are happening on 3 different breakpoints: desktop, tablet, and mobile. I've got a log that showed me all the commands that were run, and I've got Lighthouse reports that are showing me scores for these different things, and this is like for what it's worth. It's a good starting point to maybe diagnose some issues. So I can, yeah, we know about the preview, Amber. We can go back. So we did that twice. That's okay. And so now everything's passing, and these are all the checks that were run, and then you can see that the pipeline was skipped, like the deploy was skipped. So now I've merged to main, which is the push to main. That's gonna now trigger the pipeline. And I've also got Veil running, like it just does whatever it wants. So, but now we can see the pipeline running the lint and security have passed, that means deploy build can now run. So the build job in the deploy.yml file is now running. And so that's gonna let me know when that's finished. Any second now, it's going to be done. And then that's gonna kick off the deploy to GitHub Pages job. And when that is completed, it's going to give me a link to the live site. So, and it's not too, there it is. So now the site is live, it's been deployed, and it was the same from local development running Hugo server to the tugboat preview to the production environment, all the same. And I have these automatic checks, and during the development process, I caught a security vulnerability. I figured out that I needed to tune my markdown, and my watch is dead. And so I learned a whole bunch of things about what I was missing in my development that I didn't even know was a problem, but I was able to catch those problems because I had these checks in place. So pretty super fun. So I'm in the same place that I was before, but now with more pipeline. So I've got a refactored pipeline that makes a little more sense and makes a lot more sense. Things are, that security check is now bubbled up to the top, so when I'm just browsing, I'm trying to remember 3 months from now, what was I doing? And I can see, oh, I've got a security.yml. What does that job do? It's all in the files. I can find them really easily. I don't need to dig into the steps. So I think that refactor really helped clarify what is going on with this thing that I created. Like, I created this, and all of a sudden I'm getting confused. I refactor it till it's clear, and it's a good experience for me as a developer. So what did we learn? How I created a sandbox to learn some CI/CD concepts, a process of adding a local tool a command line tool that you love to a pipeline, and some essential concepts like config file, the environment, jobs, steps, triggers, and how it all ties together into a pipeline. So now go forth and build your first or 50th CI/CD pipeline, add a quality check, take responsibility for the things that you care about, make an automation that will check for the things that you care about, and put that into your pipeline, and be a happy developer. Thank you very much. Are there any questions or anything? No? You are free to go. Thank you so much.